to start with a confession. When I agreed to do this, I thought I was giving a book talk at a pub. Not quite, so bear with me. So I'm a journalist who writes about the weird side of globalization, right? What happens when nationalism and globalism collide, the cracks in the nation state system, the people that slip through them. And what set me down this sort of path of inquiry, if we're going to be really pretentious, is about 12 or 15 years ago, I was working as a reporter at Reuters, and I pitched a story about the citizenship market, the passport market. Sounds really shady, but it's actually totally above board. There's a bunch of countries that will just sell their citizenship to rich people. It's a way to raise money. And it creates a pretty weird environment. And I found myself in one because the people involved in this market, this cottage industry of bankers and lawyers and wealth managers and tax guys and God knows what, this entourage of the ultra rich, they have these confabs a couple times a year. And I went to one to report. And it was in London. And I sat in my chair with my notebook and my pen. And I watched as the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis got up on stage, much like I am here, and pitched his country's passport like it was a timeshare or one of those really heavy Amex cards. He talked about how easy it was to travel internationally with the passport, and how favorably it could position a business person to bank and transact around the world, and how little the nation asked of its citizens in the way of taxes. I also learned that a visit to St. Kitts was optional. Applicants could get naturalized from far, far away. This was before Zoom, in as little as 3 months. And if you bought a condo, they'd just throw in a passport for free. Pretty good deal. The subtext here, of course, was that a new passport could undo the accident of birth and perhaps the circumstances of one's life. And, you know, the audience were hungry for this. Like I said, they were sort of the handmaidens to the ultra-rich. There were a couple of dodgy honorary consuls of indeterminate provenance as well. But I could see that they were really keen on figuring out how they could use this to their advantage. But as the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis pitched his passport and these tax accountants kept telling me things, something really nagged at me. All of these people referred to places not as countries or nations or cities or states, but as jurisdictions. Couldn't they just say country like a normal person? Wouldn't a literal head of state, right? There's 192 countries in the world. St. Kitts is one, and they have one guy, right? Couldn't he squeeze a little more color and texture and pride from his nation than jurisdiction? What was with this euphemism? Through the repeated use of this word alone, it seemed to me that the nation and its history and all of the mythologies that surrounded it were secondary to this crowd than the legal structures than these nations were putting on offer. And sitting there watching the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, I sensed that the world was really breaking up into something weirder and more expedient than these 192 states in the map. I also knew that I would not be leaving this world anytime soon. As a reporter, I had front row seats to watch the change happen in real time. So this atlas that the bankers and lawyers and tax guys saw is not the map that you and I are taught in history or geography class. Instead of illustrating state power, it depicts a capitulation of power. Instead of authority, it projects a lenience, a parallel universe of loopholes and shortcuts and concessions. And this is a completely different way of thinking about the world and of laws and of rules. And to me, it was a revelation or an abomination, probably both. So I filed my story about the passport brokers, and I ended up writing a whole book about them and the countries that sell passports and the people who buy them. But I couldn't get this idea of like the world as jurisdictions out of my head. There was something really familiar to me about it. It was like I understood its innate logic, even though I am not a tax attorney or a billionaire. It took me 5 years to figure out why I jived with this. This world reminded me of the place where I grew up. Has anyone been to Geneva, Switzerland? Okay, one word to describe it. You. Okay, that was one of them. Nice, clean, pretty, and boring. And all of these things are true. These are the things that people will tell you about Geneva. But if you step back and you look at Geneva's legal geography, not its old town or its lake or whatever, the clock made of flowers, you see a place full of holes. It's a city of Swiss cheese. There are the banks, which for hundreds of years, or for 100 years, offered extreme secrecy to like every dodgy character on the planet under numbered accounts. Even the Swiss state did not have access to this information. On the other hand, there are countless international organizations and consulates and missions, WTO, ILO, UN, et cetera, and they're all playing by their own rules. They have their own labor laws, the UN has its own postage stamps, and the people that work at these organizations are like super high-end guest workers. They stay for 3-4 years, they move on. They're not subject to the same taxes as Swiss citizens. They don't really pay their parking tickets. And there's a special shop where if you are a category G or above at the UN, which is professional, sorry, P, you can go to the store and you can buy microwave dinners, Chanel No. 5, a Rolex, and underwear, duty-free. It's super weird. It's like in a basement. And so you have a group of people who are literally living in another world. I was part of this world. On top of the UN and the banks, you have the Geneva Freeport, which is my favorite example of the weird globalization that I'm talking about. So the Geneva Freeport is a warehouse. You go outside, nothing to look at. It's a warehouse. What's special about it is that it is a place that is on Swiss territory, but outside of it for the purposes of taxes and customs. And originally, the idea of the Geneva Freeport was that if you're a trader and you have all this grain and you're on your way to Germany or France or what have you, you can leave it there, not deal with like customs bureaucracy, and the next day or the next week, ship it off and, carry on. Nobody is moving grain in that way these days. These days, the Geneva Freeport is believed to be full of trillions of dollars worth of wine and art and cars and jewels and like the excess lucre of the ultra rich. It's like disgusting. It's like someone described it to me as Alibaba's cave, but at least the thieves went to visit their stuff. Like this stuff is in crates. Like it's like Picasso's in crates. It sucks. It's all hidden away for the purposes of taxation, of course. And so Geneva, with all of these parallel legal structures, is a microcosm of the world that the passport brokers, my old friends, inhabited. So it's no wonder that I got along with them so well, that I understood where they were coming from. And so as I researched and reported on the Freeport and other types of concessions, shall we say, I realized the world was full of little Genevas, from Dubai to the Arctic, from Luxembourg to Singapore. An example that's all around us is the special economic zone. Sounds really boring, but probably something you're wearing, something you're holding, something in your bag has hung out in one of these zones at some point. It's kind of like the Freeport. It's a place that's cordoned off on one country's territory, but playing by different rules. Often these rules are lower labor, like less regulated labor laws, lower taxes, various concessions that the private sector takes advantage of. Has anyone been on a cruise? I have not. Not a lot of cruisers in this room. If you were to go on a cruise, though, chances are that the flag of the cruise ship would be Liberia or the Marshall Islands or Panama or someplace that doesn't seem like it should be there. And the reason for that is that while no country owns the oceans, and no person yet, and we'll see next week, owns the oceans, The flag that a ship flies is what determines its laws. And so, much like the passport industry that I started talking to you guys about, there's a thriving business of selling these flags, renting out these flags, and making them as lax as possible when it comes to regulation. So, when you see this world, right, the free ports, the UN, the diplomats, the ships, the special economic zones, the world starts taking on this like really trippy aspect, like those magic eye books that were really popular in the 90s. I never saw that thing that you were supposed to see, but apparently, if you just look at them, and I see that, you see wallpaper. But if you stare in a particular way that I still have not mastered, a whole world floats up above the page. The desire to carve out exceptions from law, from life, from society is not new. Communities have always set aside places apart for worship and contemplation and rituals. Today, our elsewheres and nowheres aren't places for offering, but places of evasion. And they bridge the gap between the world of bordered independent nations and this world of freewheeling trade. These places that I've written about epitomize the strange moment we're in when a country can sell its citizenship, carve out land, rent another country's land, a la Gitmo, and even sell its URL to dodgy website operators. A while ago, every website ended in .ly. That's Libya making a killing, okay? But there's another thing that these places have in common, and it's more metaphysical. They're all, in their way, a kind of legal fiction. Almost a century ago, an American jurist named Lon Fuller defined a legal fiction as such. It is a statement that is neither truthful nor an outright lie. It is adopted by its author with full knowledge of its falsity. And it is useful precisely because it's widely understood to be false. Corporate personhood is probably the most commonplace example of a legal fiction. Most of us know that it is untrue, that corporations are actual people. At the same time, most of us also accept that they enjoy the status of a person in political life and in court. This can create some problems, right? The special economic zones, where I mentioned they have factories and lower labor laws, are perfect legal fictions because they have an alternate legal regime, but they're on the same land as the more common set of laws. And so are warehouses like the Geneva Free Port, which classifies goods inside it as being in transit while knowing well that they are not moving an inch. So, and that's kind of the plot of the movie Tenet. Some of you might have seen it. That is not a complete fabrication. He had a lot. I can talk to you a lot about Tenet. So between the walls of this warehouse, it's not just the place that's indeterminate, but it's time. Time doesn't move forward. It stands selectively still. It is a made-up place with made-up rules. And this construct, I think, reveals more constructs still. Flags of convenience on your ship are as legally fictional as the St. Kitts and Nevis investor passport, which is as legally fictional as an ambassador's residence, which is as legally fictional as his diplomatic pouch. For Lon Fuller, the lawyer, fictions become dangerous when they're treated as facts, when we forget that they aren't a truth, but a choice. Indeed, a free port is not just a fiction. It's a fiction derived from an even greater fiction of borders and fences and lines. And so when we say that a warehouse is outside of national boundaries, we end up leaning more heavily on the truthfulness of those national boundaries. Lon Fuller also believed that the legal fiction, and I'm going to quote here because it's really good, represents the pathology of the law. Only in illness does the body reveal its complexity. Only when legal reasoning falters and reaches out clumsily for help do we realize what a complex undertaking the law is. So when you begin, as we all have today, to see the world as composed of these jurisdictions and not just countries on a map, you might experience a sort of malaise, which I'm very familiar with. While reporting in Geneva and Dubai, in a village on the border of Laos and China, and a sidewalk in the city of London, in all of these jurisdictions, right, I could see exactly where I was. And yet I was made to believe that I wasn't there at all. My reasoning faltered, and I reached out clumsily for help. I grasped at the complexity of the law and of the world. Thank you.